He was not correct in the 12 diseases that he came with, only about 2/3 of them. It's interesting to see that also that the Japanese have found the body of monks which died about 3,000 years ago. And when they burned the corpse and they analyzed the content of the mineral of these Japanese monks, they found that the content of mineral 3,000 years ago is different than the content of minerals that they have in the corpse that they burn or the people who are living in these days. So there was a totally different content and concentration of mineral that we have right now than 3,000 years ago. How does the mineral deficiency problem work in man? Well, first you have an initial phase of depletion. Then the body is a genius apparatus. Then you will have a compensated metabolic phase. The body will start to adjust, will make some adjustment to get itself in the proper way. Then the body can no longer adjust, so you will have a decompensated state, and then you have a full-blown clinical disease. How do you evaluate mineral deficiency? Well, you can do a blood test, you can do urine test, you can do hair analysis, and you can use some other alternative that I have learned from my friend Sam. Let's take some of the minerals. And remember, I'm interested mainly in the minerals. I mean, I can talk to you probably until tomorrow morning, put all of you to sleep, but I have chosen some of the minerals. And remember, the more we know, the more we find how ignorant we are. And I'm speaking, of course, for myself. Chromium. Chromium is a very, very essential mineral. It activates the phosphoglucosyntase and other enzymes. It is associated with glucose tolerance factor, GTF, a combination of chromium-3, D-nicotinic acid, and glutathione. That's what is called the GTF. Tell you about a fascinating story. When I was down in Miami back in 1973, we have a kid who was in an automobile accident, and we have to do hyperalimentation on the kid. So the pharmacist did the hyperalimentation solution, and the kid was being fed by Hyperal. And about 2 weeks, the kid was comatose. And after a couple of weeks, the kid, blood sugar started to go up. So the poor kid now is diabetic. And we start treating the kid with insulin. Then a medical student we have at that time, he came and he looked at the ingredient and the stuff that you have in the Hyperal solution. It has vitamin B1 and B2 and B3 and B6 and B12 and this and that and all kind of fat and protein and glucose and you name it. And he said, this solution have no chromium. I said, okay, let's put some chromium on the Hyperal. 10 days later, we took the kid off insulin. The blood sugar came back to normal. Now, some other people have written about the relation between chromium and diabetes, and I'll come back and address that in a second. Fasting plasma chromium level of a pregnant woman is lower than that of a non-pregnant woman. Where is the chromium is going? This is part of the craving in a pregnant lady. Because the chromium is depleted in the woman because it's being taken by the fetus, by the baby. There is a lot of people who believe that what is called gestational diabetes or impaired glucose tolerance during the first or second trimester of pregnancy is related to chromium deficiency because the woman is depleted. The finding or the correlation with that most of these people, once the pregnancy is over and the baby is born, then gestational diabetes is gone. And I'm personally convinced, probably not all, but big number of gestational diabetes is related to chromium deficiency. And I'm also convinced that there is a significant increase of diabetes in this country, especially type 2 diabetes, which is related to chromium deficiency. Especially, as we'll find out in a second, if your carb consumption is high. Because high carb consumption is a major problem, and I'll tell you why in a second when it comes to chromium. 90% of Americans estimated to be chromium deficient. That's 90, not 9. The average intake of chromium is between 50 to 100 microgram of inorganic chromium from food, I'm sorry about over here about the typo, and water. And supply only 0.25, this 50 to 100 microgram supplies only 0.25 to half microgram of usable chromium. So the absorption of chromium is not very good. It's lousy, as you can see. Chelated chromium absorbed about 25%. The RDA requirement for chromium is between 50 to 200 microgram per day for adult. The concentration are higher in the newborn animals and humans than in later life. For some reason, chromium level decrease when we get older. Chromium level in unsupplemented human declines steady through life, as I mentioned, and there has been a steady decline in average chromium level in Americans since 1948. The levels of chromium have ranged from 0.075 to 13 nanogram per ml. You can see there's a big gap. So you cannot depend very much on the serum level if you want to measure chromium. Concentration in the hair is 10 times greater than blood, making hair analysis more accurate to check for chromium deficiency more than measuring the concentration in the blood. Now, some of you will come back and attack me later for hair analysis. Some of the hair analysis, we have a problem, but there is no question for some mineral, it's very important, and you get more accurate result from hair analysis than from blood concentration, such as chromium and arsenic and some other minerals. Very little chromium is stored in the body. We have only about 1.5 milligram. Once organic chromium is absorbed, it is almost entirely excreted in the urine, and therefore urine chromium can be also used instead of serum chromium to determine your chromium needs or deficiency. One of the fascinating things about chromium, the more carb, the more sugar you consume on your diet, the more chromium you waste in your urine. Some people estimate that drinking 1 can of Coke or Pepsi per day will make your chromium excretion increase by 300% for half a day. And we have kids, even diabetic kids, who come and drink 2, 3, 4, 5 cans of Coke or Pepsi per day, or sodas per day. But there is no question that chromium excretion is increased with more sugar you consume in your diet. There is only one thing that I'm aware of which will increase your lifespan, and this has been confirmed both in animal and in human studies, is to decrease your caloric intake by 1/3, which means if each one of us will eat 1/3 less than what we usually eat, this will increase your lifespan on an average about 5 to 6 years. The only other thing which is documented is chromium supplementation, which will also increase your lifespan. There is no question, and this is the mystery that we don't have, that there is a lot of interrelation or interaction between the mineral, which means sometimes if you give more of this and less of that, or the other way around, things get messed up. If you have vanadium deficiency, your wastage of chromium in your urine is much higher. So you need a little bit of vanadium to balance your chromium. The last question which we need to address is which chromium you can use. Do you need to use chromium picolinate, which you can buy probably about 1,000 pills for $10 from Sam or Costco? Or should you use chromium polynicotinate? There is no question that chromium picolinate is probably not very safe. And the reason it's not very safe, there are several reports that it is a carcinogenic. It does cause chromosomal damage. So you have to be very careful, and we recommend that you do not use chromium picolinate, but rather chromium polynicotinate. It is more expensive, about 10 times more expensive, but very few people are aware that there is a carcinogenic effect from using chromium picolinate. Let's move on a little bit. Copper. Copper is very, very essential for every living organism, and it is involved in about probably at least 100 enzymes. It's required for RNA, DNA, lysyl oxidase, cofactor, melanin production, hair and skin pigment, electron transfer of oxygen, subcellular respiration, tensile strength of elastic fibers in blood, vessels, skin, vertebrae, etc., etc., etc. One of the two fascinating things about copper, which I will also mention to you in a minute, is that most of the people who have aneurysm or die from aneurysm have copper deficiency. Because copper is very, very essential in the elasticity and the formation of the wall of the vessels, of the arteries and veins. As a matter of fact, there is a study which was done years ago where they took turkey, I think about 3,000 turkeys, and they give them a diet which is deprived from copper, and all the turkeys died from aneurysm, ruptured aneurysm. Several people have done that. So if there's two things I want to remind you about copper before we go in, is one, relation with aneurysm, and the second is relation with early graying of the hair. Now, I'm not saying every man and woman who have gray hair over here have copper deficiency, but your copper deficiency will accelerate very quickly the graying of your hair. Copper deficiencies in pregnant female results in congenital defect, including the heart and the brain and the central nervous system. Serum and plasma copper increased by 100% in pregnant women and women using birth control pills. The copper deficiency can result in anemia and poor quality of hair, loss of hair color, neutropenia, and leukopenia. You're fully aware that some of the anemia we see are not related to iron deficiency, but rather to copper deficiency. Serum copper levels are elevated during acute infection, liver disease, and pellagra, niacin deficiency. One thing over here while we are on the subject, all of you are aware of vitamin deficiency and what it can cause. Vitamin C, they discovered it causes scurvy. Niacin, it causes pellagra. Vitamin D, it will cause rickets, etc., etc. So one will ask himself also, if the vitamin deficiency can create all these problems, why are we ignorant, or we have not been very careful to look for mineral deficiency as a cause of diseases? Copper is required to utilize iodine, which means if you are copper deficient, your iodine and your thyroid function is going to be messed up.